Greetings everyone, I am RSV. Is NGS actually connected to base game? Let's ponder this question for a moment. I feel that the lack of story content currently in NGS forces us to relate NGS to base game in some way, and I feel this could have clouded my vision especially. While I do believe that they are likely in the same universe, as they do consist of the Ranger, Hunter, and of course Force classes like every other PSO game, I believe the plot points connecting base game to NGS are very thin, and on top of that could be hinting that either NGS is happening in a different timeline, or the events of NGS, despite only being 1,000 years after base game, are completely unrelated to base game. I will mention that most of the threads that connect base game to NGS are mechanical. There are two that I will mention that aren't mechanical, and that is the Darkfall's designation and of course the arc symbol on storage. These things actually have weight in the universe, connecting the two together as they come through story aspects or exist in the world. And the only other major connection is that the same classes from base game presumably exist in NGS, or the majority of them. We have not gotten a Phantom, Etoile, or Hero yet, so that makes this a fairly weak plot thread. I will say though, just because it's not the same timeline does not mean that the Guardian and Meteor are not the same person. It is possible through whatever events happened that they are the only related plot thread that links base game and NGS, depending on how the story is handled. Now here's the real problem though, I can't really debunk whether or not the base game is connected to NGS at all either. I can say that the game does feel like it's trying to turn over a new leaf and distance itself from base game, but here are points that I believe disconnect base game from NGS. No mention of the Guardian as a hero or former hero in the past. The Guardian, after the events of the end of base game, should be cemented as an historic figure that defended the Oracle fleet against the true profound darkness and the forces of Shiva, as well as protected the Oracle fleet from a myriad of other threats. It is unlikely that a connected timeline or connected series would have no mention of the Guardian as a historic figure, and there hasn't quite been any mention of any historical heroes in NGS period. Stories in a world really help world building and really expand the way that the world feels. Currently, the world of NGS feels kind of lackluster in that regard. No mention of previous events in general in regards to base game. Presumably the events of episode 6 should have had some degree of aftermath, and none of those points have been resolved really. What happened directly after the end of episode 6? What happened to the Oracle fleet at all in that period? We do not know, and the only connection we have to the Oracle fleet is the arc symbol on the storage devices. The next one is a bit finicky because we do not know exactly what happened to Fullspawn and Darkfalls after the True Profound Darkness was defeated in the Oracle sector. We don't actually know the status of Darkfalls at all after the end of episode 6. All we really know is there are other Darkfalls and presumably Fullspawn out there. But that begs the question, there are no current observable Fullspawn that contain F Factor and NGS. While the dolls would meet the criteria for being Fullspawn, they do not contain F Factor, and F Factor helps the Darkfalls reach their goals. Therefore, it is safe to assume that dolls have no connection to previous Darkfalls, or Fullspawn, which would mean that the Darkfalls in NGS isn't a Darkfalls in the eyes of people from base game. They are two separate entities, which again would send a wedge between NGS and base game, though there is no mention of F Factor or antiphotons in NGS currently, and in a way this is a very unique thing. Because if the dolls did spread F Factor, then it would be priority for the protagonist to know about it, because the Arc's defenders have been fighting it for about 500 years. Therefore, it would be absolute priority to know that a dangerous essence can kill you while you are fighting the dolls. Of course, the dolls seem to be more constructed, unlike the Fullspawn, which were entirely biological. And the biggest thing for me is that the technology level of NGS is very inconsistent, at least compared to what I'd expect from the end of episode 6. Even with a degree of regression, I believe that the technology that there should be in NGS should be a bit more varied than what we saw in, say, base game. And I use the word varied here rather than more advanced. The technology in NGS should be inconsistent because there was a technological regression. For example, just because one technology is a tier 10 and one is a tier 6 doesn't mean that you lose the tier 10 because you lose the tier 6. That is not how technological regression works. And to some degree, we do see that with the technology that there is in NGS. However, a big problem with the technological regression is that we don't see more cosmetic items around in NGS. And I know that this seems like a very unimportant detail, but hold out on that thought for a moment. After wars, in reality, war demanded technological advances to overcome the threat before them. This should be true for fighting the Fallspawn and Shiva as well. So what offshoot technologies came from the new technologies gained by fighting these enemies? Surely technology didn't stagnate from the first year of encountering them to the newest year? That to me is a bit far-fetched. And in fact, there are a lot of vanities already present in the Ark's fleet, though it could also be a stylistic representation of the game that there aren't more vanity technologies on display, and could just exist due to limitation. Ultimately though, I think that it's impossible to know until Sega confirm it themselves. For now, I hope that I at least opened people's eyes to the possibility that the two games are not connected canonically. But I've been RSV, I hope you enjoyed my video, and I'll see you next time.